very good program. So we, as we will see later, we have 4 months ahead of work in front of us, with lots of challenges and things to do. And well, I wanted to thank you for your time and dedication. So what you do is a proof that we can do business differently in the future, and we hope to impact positively SMEs first, and then the world later on. So here is a quick view on what we are going to do to cover during this presentation. So first, we are going to talk a bit about the teams. So what are they, what will they work on, and this kind of thing. Then the objectives, then an overall timeline, then your call for action for August. And then we will pass on the mic to the 4 team leaders that will present their views on resilience and sustainability on each of the benefits on which we will work. So during the presentation, do not hesitate to interrupt me. Your question and remarks are welcomed. So first, I will give you a brief overview of who I am. So I'm Nicolas Petitjean. I'm Belgium. I live in France. I have 2 kids. I'm married. I'm working for. I've been working for telecoms for 7 years, and then for 7 years again for banking. I'm currently working for SWIFT, which is the interbank network for payments. And I've joined Fabienne for B4Purpose early this year. So we work together, not closely, but we work together for BNP Paribas. So let's start. So we are 7 teams for 7 benefits. So each of you during the registration have chosen your best candidates for these teams. So Fabienne will shortly disclose the content and the assignment, so to which team you will belong. So this will come over the weekend, I guess, Fabienne?
Yes.
Yeah. And each team will be composed of 5 to 10 people, and they will be led by a team leader. So the team leader will be responsible to lead the team through the objectives. So depending on the leadership style of each team leader, you will have different approaches, and this is also the goal, to learn together, to be faced with new leadership challenges, and each of you will contribute to the objectives. And one thing we are quite lucky to do here on B4Purpose is that we have Michel with us, who's working with Map and Match. So Map and Match is a very good tool to know you better and how you can best work within teams. So knowing your assets and knowing your maybe your weaknesses, and to see how you can contribute best to the team. So I think you will soon receive some information about that, given by Michael or Michel, sorry, and you will be invited to do a survey, which is well, it can be disturbing because it seems repetitive, but you have to let loose. So when I tried it, I think I did several loops. So you have to let loose and let you don't think too much and just answer the best answer each time. So I think Fabienne, Michel will also talk a bit about the map and match, isn't it, during this call? Or
Yes.
yes, Michel, do you want to do it now?
Sure, I can.
Sure, so that you can. So since we are talking about it, you have the best opportunity to focus on that. So I'll leave the floor to you. I guess you have some material to present.
Yeah, I just need access or credentials to be able to share my screen.
Okay.
You have it.
Because I think I don't have it at this stage.
Okay.
Since you cannot start screen share while the other participant
okay.
is
So
sharing.
Okay.
Stop his.
Okay, it stopped.
Wonderful. Okay, so let me just take a moment here. So just share the screen. And with that, we'll get to my presentation. Oops. Can everybody see the presentation?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. So welcome everyone. As part of this B4Purpose sustainability projects, I'll be leading and group number 6, which is reduced hiring and attrition expenses. This presentation here, we'll look at one dynamic of it, so a little bit different than some of the other presentations. The essence of time, but also to give a context. Nicola talked about a survey. Actually, talent technologies do exist. Everybody's got talents, and it creates a mindset for teams. And anytime you put more than one person together, you automatically have a team mindset. And so I was proposing the use of this survey. It's from Map and Match, but it actually comes from Expert 5A and a researcher, Chantal Jans, out of France, with 2 PhDs, who basically built a systemics algorithm on sustainable leadership, actually, that is bias-free. So it's one of the few bias-free tools I've come across over my career as we look at collective intelligences, and that's what it is. We have 7 different groups here, and so I had proposed to put that forth. It's completely voluntary and free to essentially demonstrate its performance, because it is part of wanting us to develop messaging and groups within the sustainability communities, and seeing that this is an algorithm that helps teams perform better. And does support the concept of sustainable organization development and designs, both for individuals, teams, and organizations. I felt it was relevant. So if you permit, I'll give you a little bit more information on this. In terms of leadership challenges and teams, it's not about putting the most intelligent people together or the strongest. It actually today is about adapting to change. When I started my career, it was frequently people would say, on their resumes, 20 years experience, 30 years experience, and say it with pride. Today, though, the question is what have you done in the last 6, 12, or 18 months to learn something new and adapt to change? And change used to double back then around every 25 years. And around 2017, they calculated that change, the information doubles every 18 months, 12 to 18 months. And by 2030, we'll be moving towards every 12 hours, which means every day when we wake up, we're faced with change. And the real challenge, I think, is how do we adapt to that? And it's not about absorbing more information. As human beings, we just can't, but it's about how do we then come together as teams. And also the other aspect that Chantal brought about is what she calls the natural talents, which is really what do I love to do, which creates energy, is also somewhat measurable as well, and can be mapped to roles and phases of projects and interactions within companies. And she identified that there's 20 factors, whether you're a company of 1, 100, or 100,000, that you need to balance and harmonize in order to have a sustainable management system, a sustainable organization. So it's about adapting to change, and I think this is extremely relevant with the subject of sustainability, is how at a planetary level are we doing it, and we need to move on beyond the financial consequences, looking at the broader economic and societal aspects of it as well. And I think that's central to this theme. So it's about agility. and it's about helping us pivot better in uncertainty. And each of these projects have a lot of uncertainty. So being able to measure the mindset of the teams and help to optimize the outcomes is the goal of this survey. Without going into a lot of details, we are looking at a model that manages sustainability. It promotes engagement because when you put people in their talents, one of the concepts that I'm really working in the last years is how to break down the boxes. The boxes being jobs and roles that tend to be square and we tend to fit and recruit people and put them in. My role as leader is to try to help organizations break those. It means that we actually have to help them manage better because it's kind of a lazy management way of just taking people and putting them into a box. We're not boxes. And there's technologies that exist to help us customize roles for people. It takes a little bit more management effort, but isn't that the goal of being more sustainable is having more people in their in working in the places that they like. And one small example I use oftentimes is with accounting roles where we put in collections. We're dealing with people who can be introverted if they are. And if they are, then it makes no sense to attach certain roles that are extremely irritating for them, but also has a consequence on the economics of the company because a controller and accountant that doesn't like to do collections because it requires them to do phone calls and do other things that are less within maybe their area of comfort is actually going to have an impact on cash flows. And you can see it, behaviors actually have an impact on collections in this case because of the behaviors are not matched with what we're asking to do. It's a simple thing to break that out and give it to someone who actually likes to do it. And it's a small example, but one that I know business people, get right away. We also talk about systemics in management with bias-free helps innovation and diversity. What we found in a lot of studies is that as human beings, we naturally tend to gravitate to what we know, which means we often create homogeneous groups. They're usually more satisfied, but the consequence of that is they're less innovative. So innovation is something we actually have to manage, and it's actually can be an irritant to teams and organizations because it's not necessarily straightforward. It's learning to live with not necessarily discomfort, but with that factors that we're less familiar with, and so this whole element of sustainability includes a direct link to innovation and diversity. And so within our teams, if we find that there's elements where there's potential mindsets for groupthink and whatnot, it'll be to each team to determine how to address that. So I'm not here to prescribe a way. I'm here to provide information and tools so that each team can say, oh, okay, we might have these tendencies. How do we want to make sure in our project that we address it so that we might come out with a more sustainable, balanced decision-making process is the goal. It's measurable, means that it's trainable and delegatable, and that we'll see exactly with a very simple process report for yourselves, a report for the team, and a little bit of debrief how that process can actually work in a live example. And it may identify some hidden talents with people. I often find that to be the case. I know it was for myself when I came across that survey, and that's why I started looking into it and wanted to get additional training, and finally got in touch with the founder and Chantal to actually give me some further insights and training on how she used it within her 30-year consulting career. It's actually used with, she's been using it successfully with top athletes that were going to Olympics, the French soccer team, the #1 team in France, I know, and a number of CEO organizations that she worked with over 30 years. So it's got a lot of on-the-ground credibility. And it's about also in the context of project number 6, we talked about reducing costs in hiring. Well, if you can mobilize more quickly your talents, reduce cycle time, increase success rates, it means you should get less turnovers, you should get a lot of impacts. And this is something that we may not be able to observe in the groups here directly, but somewhere along the line, it may help in the decision-making process, and that you should be able to observe. So at the end of the day, we're looking at an element of measurable human capital. Oftentimes it's something people throw away and just say it's intangible or work it just with their guts. So it is measurable. We are measuring elements of intangibility, and human science is continuing to innovate and finding new ways to do this better and better. I want to make sure that it gets used in a productive way and not in a way that pigeonholes people, but does the reverse, breaks the box and permits them to position themselves and pivot towards what they love to do. It's a little bit what it is. A lot of people have heard of the hard skills and the soft skills. More and more we've heard about those as differentiators in terms of behavior profiles, traditional psychometrics. This is not psychometrics. It's systemics, actually. And so the Expert 5A is a natural and systemic talent system. Another factor for agility and learnability is learning agility, cognitive, which oftentimes learning styles are not the same. Different people, some learn more in a more linear fashion, some work more in a broader fashion. So learning agility is also important to understand how we learn. And then with any company, as we get down to it, or any society or any group, the alignment with value and culture is extremely important. And something else that also you put a great talent into a culture that doesn't fit with them, and they're likely to fail or not perform as well. So this whole element of alignment and culture fit, and trying to bring that to leadership consciously. You can't manage culture, but you can influence it. And today's leaders need to understand that, and be provided some tools to be able to help shape what I call, managing the garden, if you want, where we basically continue seeding it. And to me, that creates sustainable competitive advantage for different groups at all levels, from companies to right up to our society. Without getting into any detail here, we can look at it from an individual, a team, and organization perspective. We'll be focusing it on the team value here to complement and balance the mindsets and the talents within the team. What it will look like is your report will have 4 elements. Let me just move this if it's in the way. The way of approaching problems, there are 4 ways. Your reports will go through it, but from the big picture, from more the explorer, the green side, which is more the creativity, blank piece of paper, more towards the pragmatism, getting things done, which tends to be the black to the right, and below which is needs to get into details. People who love to drill down and go get those details. So right away, everyone has 1, 2, possibly 3 of these. No one has actually all 4 usually. And so as you start putting people into a group, you're going to find that mindset can shape. So if a team, for example, doesn't have any blue, or doesn't have any green, or doesn't have any black or red, might have implications on points of view that might be missing or could be more absent than other points of view. And that's the point, is how we want to address that thereafter. Then you have favorite phases. There are 4 phases to individual development, to team development, and to organization development. Some people like the initiation phase, the growth phase, the maturation phases are where we start pinning things down and structuring them for repeatability. And then that return on experience, it's either ending the project or renewal of projects. And in order to have sustainable organizations, teams, or societies, those 4 phases need to be present at different times within the cycle. So again, if a team is predominantly Q1, Q2, Q3, or Q4, or has a certain dominance, it will have an impact on the progress of the project, and being aware of it can look at it. I had in May the opportunity to work with 8 teams, university students from a parish university who did an entrepreneurial course with their groups, and it was interesting how one group was predominantly phase 1, so they were able to kick off the project really easily, but as they got into the deliverables, started struggling. There was another team in the Q3, which is basically the producing of collaterals, and they got stuck on the beginning of their projects. Part of the solution was maybe those 2 teams should talk together and help each other out. Maybe there's other possibilities as well. And that leads into profile dynamics of an individual, in which phase that they're in primarily. And again, those tends to be the dominant things that create that joy of doing, that we call ADN talents. And then you'll see a mapping of those ADN talents against the 20 factors. And if people are more curious and whatnot, I offer an opportunity to debrief, ask questions, and maybe try to relate that to some of the things that you're trying to do. And then with that, we'll be able to do a team mapping. This is what I'll be sharing with the team collectively. Again, with no names on it, just looking at the collective talents that we have, so that if there are, I call it holes in the racket, we all have the analogy of a bit of because the frame there kind of looks like a bit like a tennis racket. We all have holes in a racket. No one has all the dimensions. So we can bring those out and look at the DNA of the team, actually. And from that, you guys can determine each within the teams how you may want to address that, or how it has an influence on possibly how different tasks might be distributed, et cetera, based on people's indicated strengths. And again, talents are not competencies. Competencies is the know-how. The talents is the joy of doing. So it's usually what happens when you map the joy of doing. Usually competencies get developed over time much more quickly when we're in that area. And we can also map goals. So people who are into more project management methodologies, Agile, Scrum, Lean, Baldrige, there's a connection between the moment, what they call stakeholder management, the moment that you identify a project goal and a team, and then you need to deploy. And so this diagnostic tool can help deployment decisions, mobilization, complementing the team where there may be absences, optimizing teams, what we call team on the field. They're in action, and this is essentially where we're going to be using here. You're the team on the field. That's the team that you have. How do we optimize it? And then potentially how we balance things out. And with that, what we have is a survey. To access the survey, I need a bit of information. I need your name and email, and for privacy laws and stuff like that. So there's a little authorization form that's available on this form, and I'll also chat it here during the conversation for those who are interested. And again, there's no requirement to do this. This is completely optional for everyone. So we've asked the team leads to give it a try. That's in process. We will send, we'll ask each team lead to send the link to each of you. I'll also send it out today. As participants, you'll get a report, confidential. Your report is confidential to you, and an opportunity to debrief. We can do this by phone, by web, or whichever way is convenient, or even by email if you have questions, in whichever manner is most convenient to you. And then I will create a no-name report for each team, so they can actually get a view on their mindsets and share that, and opportunity to discuss it and see if that influences the way that you might want to manage your respective teams. And so, thank you.
Thank you, Michel.
Thank you.
So I think it's very good opportunity. So I did the survey with Michel, and I got some very good insight on who I am and how I behave in teams. So I really encourage each of you to do it. It's really an added value to contribute better. So thank you again, Michel. So I will continue. Let me share again my screen. Share. Okay, so we were there. So as I said, there will be 7 teams. So you see here each of the team together with its team leader. So maybe what we will ask to the team leader, so those we will talk today, is to give a very brief introduction about themselves, so that we can take the opportunity to know them better, as they will all have the opportunity to speak not on this particular meeting, but over this meeting and the next one planned for end of August. So the objectives of what B4Purpose want to achieve, well, first is to share information. We all come from different background. We have a different environment. We've been confronted to different issues. We have different way of dealing with them. So it's to use this diversity to provide well, to share this knowledge first, and based on this very diversified knowledge, is to use this information to produce breakthrough recommendation to SME to achieve better sustainability. So this is really the main goal, and we have different outputs. So the first one is to do a white paper. So the white paper will be a quite formal document in which we will list what we worked on and what will remain to be covered. Then there will be also a short video in order to make it easier to understand what we worked on. And there will be a survey so that the DSME can self-audit their sustainability so that we can best answer to their need. So the developers are, first there will be a webinar based on each of the benefits and the information collected by Fabienne. So feedbacks, mainly feedbacks from SMEs, so that each team can provide and share information to other teams. So this will be a great way to learn about each of the benefits and how and what the SME says about it. Then there will be the white paper and the video and the survey. So I've also put this on a timeline so that it's easier to understand what comes first and what come afterwards. So the way we design it is that there will be a kickoff early September where we will have Bob Willard, who created and wrote about the 7 benefits. So there will be a webinar with him where he will introduce these topics. And then well, we plan to have work within team to work on the high-level structure of the white paper. So what should be inside the white paper to make it meaningful? So in parallel, there will be the preparation of the webinar for each team to present, as I said, the benefits. And then in November, since the information, what the structure of the white paper will be quite clear, so there will be a first draft of the script together with the first draft of the white paper. And then we will send the first script of the video to a company specialized in doing this kind of video. And there will be a follow-up to make sure that the video is in line with what we expect. And then there will be a white paper review. And then designing the survey. So what are the questions we need to ask SMEs to best understand what are the challenges and how we can answer to them. So your action for August. So the first one is to sign the agreement for those who haven't done it yet. Then get to know the theme of your team. So one of the 7 benefits, so that everyone can be up to speed when we start in September. Then obviously there will be the map and match survey. So this is not something that is mandatory, but I think it's a good opportunity for each of us to do it. And the last one is to get familiar with WIMI, because as you know, or you may not know it yet, but all the work that we will do will be done on a platform called WIMI. So you will get used to how it works. So maybe we will provide you some information on quick how-tos, so that you don't waste too much time doing it. But it's quite easy to use. But we will see the best way for you to not lose time on trying to learn this new tool. So that's the end of the presentation. So Fabienne, I think we keep the question and remarks for the end, and we jump straight to the team leader presentation.
Yes, the next presentation will be from JP.
Okay, JP, I will stop sharing. It will be, and the first will be, and the floor will be up to you.
Perfect, thank you. With me a moment. And
Fabienne, if you could just quickly indicate that you can see my screen.
Yeah, I can see it.
Perfect. Okay, so for those of you who were not on the introductory call or are new, my name is JP Brown, and I'll be spearheading Group 3 of this project. And I'm a sustainability analyst, and I've been with my current company for the last 5.5 years here in Toronto, where I'm a lead analyst for a company that does environmental assessments and consulting. I apologize, but I seem to have, oh, there we go. Just needed my notes. Thank you. So to jump right in, over the next 5 minutes, I'm going to provide some feedback on the article and the videos that Fabienne shared that you all should have seen by now, mainly in the form of some follow-up questions that I think we should examine. I think that doing this will prepare us for when we start writing the external presentations that we just talked about in the white papers and the webinars. Following that, I'll offer some brief recommendations regarding some of the concerns that these materials raised as it applies to waste, which is going to be the focal area of Group 3. And at the end, I'll be happy to take any questions. So let's begin with the article. The first claim that jumps out at me is the statement that 41% of businesses now consider sustainability a top priority. I think that it's important to know what that number was before COVID, which isn't very clear from the article itself, because if it was, say 39%, then that metric basically has remained stagnant. Whereas if it was only 25% before, then that's significant. And obviously, if it was only say 5% before, then that's a massive change in how businesses are thinking. I also think it's important to clearly define what a top priority is. For example, is it considered on par with profit? Is it more important than investor relations? If so, how much more? I think that many of us have probably come across organizations that prioritize too much. And if everything is a priority, obviously nothing's a priority. And that doesn't mean that everything else has to fall by the wayside. It just means that there need to be gradations in priorities. Next, the article talks about how 83% said that the challenges of COVID led them to improve relationships with their customers. So, same question as before, what was that number before COVID? If we want to measure the significance of COVID as it applies to these areas, then we need a minimum of 2 data points to be able to draw the vector and see what the effect was. The other thing that matters in this case is how they're actually measuring that improvement. Is it based solely on increased retention, or are they actually getting feedback from their customers? And is the increase they're seeing an increase in their customer base, or is it existing customers just buying more from them? So moving on to the first video by John Bird, he talks about, quote, being nice to stakeholders. Now, that can be very easy when all your stakeholders line up in terms of their priorities, but when we're drawing up a plan of action that SMEs are actually going to use, we need to consider how they'll deal with situations where they have multiple stakeholders with competing or even conflicting priorities. There can be a tendency to approach stakeholder engagement as sort of this monolith, and we need to be cognizant of the fact that they're not a single line item, and even an SME can have multiple stakeholders very different from each other that they need to deal with. The other thing he talks about is the need for supply chain diversification. Now, that sounds very nice, but the challenge of SMEs is that they don't have the buying power of large enterprises. Sometimes there's a minimum requirement that they need to have just to even place an order, let alone to get a bulk discount. Obviously, there are companies like Amazon that will ship any amount to anyone, but not everything is available through a company like Amazon. And if an SME needs regular orders of very specialized components, that can be problematic for them to even split their order in 2, let alone into multiple suppliers. So I think that when we're considering recommending something like this in our white papers, we need to strategize around this challenge. Maybe it means figuring out how groups of businesses that operate in close proximity to each other can bulk order and maybe pick up from a central point, or maybe it means finding ways for them to order less often so that they can bulk up enough to diversify among multiple suppliers. The last point of his that I want to touch on is the need for innovative individuals. Obviously, this is going to mean looking at how SMEs are doing their hiring. I've been on interviews where I've been asked, have you ever solved the problem at your previous job? This might be a question we see more of, and I certainly think that it's one that we need to encourage SMEs that we work with to start asking. However, obviously, I think that as we come out of COVID, the new hiring is going to be slow. And that means that it pays us to consider the question, are innovation and creativity things that can be taught? Can existing employees learn these skills? I think this is something that Michelle alluded to a little in his presentation. There's a fairly common sentiment that creativity is some kind of innate skill that you either have or you don't have. I'm not entirely convinced that's true. And as we come out of COVID, what we may see is a lot of people who were never seen as very much innovators before come out of the woodwork. In the meantime, on our end, what we can do is considering what training tools we could offer SMEs that we work with in this regard to help them identify people that not even are innovative, but potentially could be trained on it. The last video was a little more condensed, obviously, and the only question that really jumped out at me was, are there solutions that I'm seeing on that screen, are they themselves resilient? What I mean by that is, even if they're contributing to more resilient operations like using less energy, being less dependent on key resources, doing less environmental degradation, are they themselves resilient enough to survive the harsher storms, the pandemics, increased heat, flooding, and all the rest of it? There's a scene in that video, if some of you remember, of them installing solar panels in a field. And when I saw that, my first question was, could that solar panel survive a hailstorm, for instance? You might be thinking, well, don't put them where there's hailstorms, but the very problem with climate change is that we can't predict severe weather the way we used to. I remember a few years back, we had 4 tornadoes, for instance, on the same day, just outside Toronto in Vaughan. When I was growing up, I mean, that was unheard of. So the scope of bad things that can happen has increased, and our proposed solutions need to be cognizant of that. So to finish off, I'm going to speak briefly about 3 areas where I think we can apply some of the concepts in the article and the videos to waste, which is, as I said, the focal point of group 3. First, we can teach SMEs how to work with their supply chain partners to reduce packaging. I just shipped a TerraCycle box back to TerraCycle. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that program, but basically they're a company that will take back hard to recycle materials and recycle them on your behalf. Honestly, most of what I recycled was packaging. It's hard to get local programs to take it, and there's a lot of it. In addition to reaching out to suppliers proactively on reducing packaging or making it easier to recycle, we can also help SMEs find options where they can receive goods in reusable containers that can either be sent back or shipped downline, depending on where the SME sits in the supply chain, and again, grouping or coordinating with local SMEs. On resilience, obviously, the best way to deal with an emergency is to avoid one in the first place. You know, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, as the saying goes. This is important because, as anyone knows, during an emergency, there's a lot of waste. You're not worrying about what goes into what bin. You're not thinking about long-term consequences. Everything is happening now and you just want to fix it. And of course, material demand increases in the short term. We've seen that with disinfectant, we've seen it with face masks, we've seen it with gloves. Obviously, all this amounts to an added expenditure for the business with no return apart from potentially avoiding liability. So when we're talking SMEs, it's important that we try to link these things together. Lastly, I think we should teach SMEs how to identify historical shortages. It's already a given that we're going to be talking about the great toilet paper famine of 2020 for a good long while. But in the future, we need to teach SMEs how to use existing demand data to plan for shortages in ways that don't involve stockpiling more than they can afford in warehouse space that they don't have. And on a related note, if the SMEs that we're working with are doing any kind of collection, for instance, if they are collecting donations, if they are collecting, even waste materials, it's important that they know how to communicate specific needs so that they don't take in more than they can keep. Some of you may recall that after 9/11, people were lined up around the block to donate blood. And while this was both noble and patriotic, the reality is that the blood banks didn't have the necessary space to store it. The result was that a lot of it had to be discarded, unused, and since we're talking about medical waste, I suspect that disposing of that much blood wasn't cheap. My point is that over-preparedness in the wrong areas can be just as wasteful or more than consumption itself. So that brings me to the end. I will be happy to take any questions. Stop sharing my screen.
Don't seem to be any questions. There were a few comments regarding TerraCycle on the chat. So, for instance, Natasha said that she used TerraCycle and she liked the loop, the idea of the loop as well.
Mhm.
Okay, so if there are no questions, I think we can move on
Thank you.
to the next one. Thank you very much.
Hi.
Aline.
Aline, yes, I have one question, not one question, I think a comment on TerraCycle. I think it's fantastic. I am a bit concerned with what happens with the collected waste. And I'm just have something in the back of my mind where I'm looking for more due diligence on what happens there. Just that kind of note there, just take note of that. I would really love to see more competition on that front and accessibility, because it's fairly expensive.
Yeah, no, that is true. I mean, like certainly for the box that I got, it cost me well over $100 by the time, you know, the shipping and everything was done. And it's, yeah, you know, you're right. Once it's out the door, you don't know what happens to it. The same is actually true, though, really of local recycling programs as well. You know, and I mean, as we've discovered, a lot of the stuff was not actually being recycled locally. It was being, until relatively recently, being shipped to China. So, yeah, no, it's really hard to get that information once it, you know, goes behind a corporate wall, or even, you know, if it's a government program.
Hi,
Sorry, would you have a difficulty?
Duncan here. I've got a question or a bit of an observation around the work of the waste group that you're leading, JP,
Mhm.
and the group that's looking at materials. I'm wondering, obviously there are links between the two, and I'm wondering where design for environment comes in terms of trying to design sustainable products and services, and therefore reducing waste at source more than thinking about it at the end of the pipe, if you like.
No, it's a good, yeah, that's absolutely a good point. I read Gregory Unruh's Earth Inc. A number of years back, and one of the first points he made that the easiest way to make something easier to dispose of is to make it, for instance, of less components to begin with.
Yeah.
There are products out there that, you know, are comprised of as many as 600 different chemical components, and, you know, to try to disassemble them at end of life, I mean, and obviously the, you know, a chore if it can even be done at all. So you're definitely right to, in terms of waste, to think about how the product is designed to begin with.
And also to bring in the concept of circularity, and to get SMEs to start thinking about that through their supply chains and their value chain. And obviously most SMEs aren't going to be able to influence the whole of the value chain that they operate in, but there are things that they can do, especially if they start working with other companies within that value chain and supply chain, to start getting away from, you know, the linear model to the circular model.
Yeah, and the other thing is, you know, one man's garbage is another man's treasure, and we've seen that a bit with food waste, where, you know, for instance, grocery stores in France are starting to sell their so-called ugly fruit, which, you know, maybe it can't be sold as fruit and maybe no one buys it as fruit, but I mean, if a bakery comes in and says, I'll take the ugly apples off your hands, and, you know, they put them in pies, I mean, no one actually sees it then, so who cares?
Okay, thank you.
I have a question, if I could, please. In terms of the proximity of the whatever is being shipped to the retailer or to the customer, I mean, because a lot of the waste that is accrued in shipment is because of the distance of the shipment, whether you're shipping from Europe to Canada, or I'm in Toronto. But yeah, so I'm wondering about the supply chain being localized as opposed to participating in, you know, the global economy more, which I think we're actually moving into more post-COVID, sourcing locally as opposed to globally. And I'm wondering what that has to, you know, how that impacts the supply, the waste chain.
Well, I mean, certainly for a long time, we've known that transportation emissions are a huge part of the GHG footprint. So certainly, on those grounds alone, we should be looking for ways to think more logistically about where stuff comes from. I've been for a long time a proponent of vertical farming, which obviously is where you grow the food within multi-level buildings, and then you virtually eliminate that footprint entirely because things don't have to come in from the countryside. They don't have to come in from other cities or other countries. Obviously, one thing that is going to have to be seriously thought about for that to take effect is how to incentivize companies to actually make the things that need to be made locally.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard stories from people who have said, like, we own a company, we don't want our promotional product made in China, but we have looked around. And it's not that someone is doing it, locally and charging too much, it's that literally no one is willing to make the product.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know the Ontario government has put into place a program with some local manufacturers that actually promotes them making more of the components themselves, and then the government funds them to ramp up that production and to hire additional people in order to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I think that's an ongoing kind of initiative that we probably need to develop.
For sure.
Yep. Thank you.
Indeed. Well, thank you very much, JP, and all the person who asked questions. So I think we will move on to the next team leader, which is who is Francisco.
Yes.
Francisco, over to you.
Thank you. I'm sharing the screen. Just a second. Can you see my screen?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Not yet. Sorry, I don't know.
Maybe they can go ahead with the next panelist while you're trying to fix this.
Yeah, I don't know if Fabian can present for me, but I think I got it.
Okay.
Can you see it now?
See your screen. Yes.
Nice, thank you. Well, hi everyone, my name is Francisco Perez, and I'm going to be the team leader for group number 4, which aims to reduce material and water expenses. As introduction, I'm living in Cardiff, Wales, in the UK. Related to my work experience, I have over 6 years of experience working in procurement and supply chain, managing different categories in the aerospace industry. Besides, I'm finishing my master in sustainable supply chain management at Cardiff Uni. Well, and I'm very excited to be part of this project, to work with you, and I hope we can meet each other better during this project. Also, I would like to introduce Fred. He is going to be our campaign assistant. Well, today we have a presentation about the articles and videos uploaded by Fabian. The first part is a summary of them, and the second is an introduction to our particular topic and how it's related. It's 5 minutes, so bear with me, please. First, we would like to start talking about the current situation. We all know that we are in the COVID-19 crisis. This is impacting companies all around the world, but especially it's impacting small businesses. For instance, according to the economists in the USA, 20% of the small businesses are closing. We know that we are going to see an economic recovery in the future that is going to change the customer behavior and the way that companies make business. Besides, 90% of the SMEs are suffering negative impact from the pandemic, and almost half of them some kind of disruptions in the supply chain. So basically, this crisis has placed the resilience and sustainability as a very important concept. On one hand, resilience allows companies to be more flexible and to recover better from unexpected events. Companies aiming to be more, for example, resilient, have better diversification. This is something that you were talking earlier. For instance, in terms of suppliers, you can choose to work with local supplier or from overseas, or maybe a combination of both. This is changing the globalization for regionalization. So it's a new trend in evolution. Resilience is tightly connected to sustainability. Sustainability, of course, is a broad concept, but shares some benefits that help companies' resilience. For instance, it's allowed companies to have a stronger network, a culture of innovation that is very important, and to have a long-term business strategy. Therefore, companies that adopt resilience and sustainability within their business strategy will adapt better to this new normality and keep their competitive level. So now the question is how resilience and sustainability help to reduce material or water expenses. Well, this is very long to explain, and it's going to be one of our objectives during this project. However, with Fred, we wanted to present two potential benefits. For instance, if companies reduce water usage, this can directly reduce the cost bill at the end of the month. And using the water efficiently can reduce the risk of environmental contamination or pollution. This is very important, especially, for example, in the clothing and laundry industry. On the other hand, if companies reduce the quantity of material, this can contribute to reducing the cost of production. It's going to reduce the cost of disposal at the end of the life cycle. This is what Duncan was talking about as well with GP. And some companies believe that the cost of waste is just the cost of disposal, but in the reality includes material, labor, and energy. So to finish our presentation, I would like to present the quote by John Beer, which in my opinion, start to answer this question. When we reduce material use and energy use, and this is related to water use as well, we help make the company less vulnerable to sudden commodity supply shocks or price increases. Thank you.
Thank you, Francisco. So we have a couple minutes for questions and remarks for Francisco and Fred.
Natasha is writing, yes, I think this is, water will become one of the most valuable commodities of the planet. So it's one of the it's going to be one of the most important raw materials to be considered by companies. Exactly.
And yes. Indeed, the quote that you used is very to the point. I think it summarizes it very well.
Just quickly on the water metering, that you had, on the water metering that you had on the slide.
Mm-hmm.
While it is true that a lot of commercial and industrial spaces are metered and the tenants are individually paying, like one thing that I've found, because this is part of the work I do, is I actually read the bills, is certainly here in Canada, in a lot of areas, water is billed very irregularly, like, 3 months, 4 months at a time, sometimes even, as many as 8 months apart. So it's not a cost that businesses are seeing all the time. And, couple that with the fact that in Canada, relative to other countries, cost for water tends to be very low. It's harder to incentivize that type of action than, for instance, energy, where the costs are, number one, much higher, and number two, they're seeing the numbers a lot more often.
Yeah, absolutely. This is true, and try to explain companies and people that it's not only the water that you are wasting, is the distribution, the cost of fixing the distribution tubes and the energy that you need to, for example, in Canada, this should be important, but you have to heat water. So if you are wasting hot water, you're wasting more energy. So yeah, absolutely. There is a lot of hiding costs over there, and it's very important for companies, but it's hard to explain it.
So thank you very much, Francisco. Unfortunately, we have to end the discussion here because we only have 5 minutes to cover the last topic, which will be covered by Tim. Tim, over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll share my screen. Let me know if you can see it. Can you guys see the screen?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. 5 minutes, so I'll be quick, which is good maybe. Yeah, just a few words of introduction about myself. I am German. I'm also currently in Germany, but I now and since quite a bit spent most of my time also in Toronto, Canada. So that's the connection there. My background is in research and consulting. I spent multiple years at a large research institute for applied research in Germany. Sorry, phone is ringing. We'll just ignore that for a second. Yeah, and so I've mostly spent my time on organizational transformation, so the service transformation, digital transformation, and recently also sustainability. So I'm still relatively new to the topic. And today, representing Group 7, I want to talk about reduced risk and how that can be represented through sustainability. And going into that, I want to talk for a second about why are we talking about this right now? Why are we talking about high risk for companies? And the reason for that is the VUCA world, as we call it. And I'm sure most of you have heard about this. The world is becoming increasingly more volatile, more uncertain, more complex, and more ambiguous. And that is something that shows through multiple areas, as you can see on this slide here, right? The VUCA world essentially comes from different aspects like the environment on the top left, digital transformation. We have a lot of new technologies that make things a lot more fast moving and more innovative for companies. We have social crises like the refugee crisis, we have globalization, and we have unexpected political events, which is not a political statement here, but I'm sure we are all aware that the global political landscape has become a lot more unpredictable in the past. And so companies are exposed to this new world that is changing very rapidly. And I just want to point out one area of risk that emerges for companies from that. As you will notice, I've taken this from Bob Werler's slides where he talks about the climate crisis and the business risks. And for reasons of time, I won't go through all the risks here, but we can see what this world does to businesses, right? We have a long list of new risks that emerge for businesses and that businesses have to deal with. And the question, of course, that we're asking ourselves also as a group is how should they deal with those risks? And so I guess my answer that I just want to briefly introduce today, as I work more on strategic topics rather than operational topics, is one where businesses need to understand the system that they're working in. And so very briefly said here, we often talk about value as utility, something that emerges for one player in monetary terms, in economic terms. And I think my approach is that we have to understand that that's not at all what value is. It's only a proxy to value. And we have to understand that value is created always within the context of a society, within the context of an ecological environment. And so businesses increasingly with this world, with this VUCA world, need to take into account the system within which value is created. So I would say that's the most crucial point for businesses to realize. To understand this environment and to also understand that there are recursive effects depending on their actions. The system will change and these actions will somehow have a feedback loop that influences the businesses again. And so that from a strategic point of view means that a lot of things have to change for businesses in the way that they do business and also in the way they do strategy. Just really briefly, the way that strategy traditionally is being done since decades is forecasting, where we kind of have a 5-year planning horizon. We make strategic scenarios based on current trends, but that is, just to summarize, what I would consider insufficient, because we do not look at the system, we don't connect our vision and our strategy, we have an insufficient databases, and we have insufficient stakeholder involvement. I'm really sorry about the phone ringing. I'm trying to shut it down, but it doesn't. Just give me 1 second. There we go. Taking batteries out always works. Sorry about that. Okay. So briefly, let's look at how I would say, instead of doing traditional strategic development with forecasting, I would say we answer VUCA with VUCA. Read from the bottom to the top here, we need vision, understanding, collaboration, and agility. That is what businesses in the future need to focus on in order to become more resilient and in order to reduce their risks. So we need to create a vision that looks ahead 20 to 30 years. We need to understand our entire ecosystem. We need to co-create value with the entire ecosystem and collaborate. And we need to become agile in an operative way, but also with our cognitive flexibility, right? As a business, for example, as a car manufacturer today, I have to be flexible as to what my future business models will be. And so in order to do that, I want to propose backcasting as a method, as opposed to forecasting. And in order to do backcasting and in order to reflect the system, we need also new tools of how we develop strategy. And here I mainly want to point at one tool that has actually been developed out of Canada. For those of you who know the business model canvas, the Osterwalder business model canvas that is often used for innovation in companies, this one kind of uses and builds on the model of the business model canvas, but does include the societal and environmental layers. And so I think that this also for small and medium-sized companies is a great way in order to have a more systemic view on how value is created and to implement that into their business model, thus reducing their risk and becoming more resilient. And so I think I'll just switch over this slide now, because that just talks a little bit about the backcasting process. And I'm going to finish for you guys by saying, I think in order to become more resilient, small and medium-sized businesses must understand that they need to move from predict and control, as represented in the top left picture here, towards sense and respond, in order to deal with the VUCA world as I introduced it in the beginning. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Tim. So if there are any questions, remarks, we can take it.
I'm just reading through the chat now, and I see if this is related to the underlying idea of donut economics. Sorry, Nicola, I just thought I'd briefly take that up, and I would say yes, very much. And the tools that I just showed are very much related to the same idea of staying within those limits and not exceeding our boundaries. And it is definitely a challenge to map the donut, as we would call it right now, to individual businesses and to really understand how they need to act in order to make sure that they as a single business also stay within the donut.
There are the questions in the chat.
Yeah, I'm just seeing Natasha. I mean, donut economics as on the reading list for this project. I think it should be on anyone's reading list, so I'm going to say yes to that. Definitely, yeah. I think it's great, especially because it very much also speaks to the mindset change that's necessary. Because I really do think that we're not going to achieve the goal of having a future for the next generations if we just think about reducing impact. I think we really have to think about what the thresholds are out there and how we can stay within those thresholds. And I think partly that will mean not just looking at individual profit and growth for companies, but we will have to take a systemic point of view and understand how we can maintain the viability of that system for the future. And I think she does that perfectly in that book.
And I have a question for you, Tim. So I know there are several business canvas, including sustainability, and since they are different one, do you think they would one will win over the others? How do you see?
I don't think so at all. I think even from the Flourishing Business Canvas that I've just introduced, it's already, I mean, it's only a platform to develop more specific canvases for different contexts. So for example, we've now also developed that one into a canvas for the municipal development of business models or city management models, I would say. And so I think what's important is not the canvas, but the premises behind the canvas. And as long as those point towards sustainability, I think that's the important part. And then you need to see the specific context that you're developing in, and then it's very possible that different canvases can coexist depending on the context they're meant for.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question, if I may. John Baird, I went ahead and watched some of the other videos other than the ones that were indicated, which is great. I mean, great source of information, John Baird. But he talked about context-based sustainability and how ecosystems have limits, and so therefore we need to have science-based targets for companies. So that implies metrics. So in terms of risk and setting targets so that we can actually mitigate, you know, not passing the limits. Do you have any ideas about that, or can you address that?
I'm sorry, could you clarify, like how we can measure?
Yeah, so in terms of, because you're talking about planetary boundaries, you know, limits of ecosystem, and our activities that could overreach those boundaries, right?
Yes.
And so in terms of a company wanting to know how far they can go, what are the targets that would keep them under, you know, transgressing the boundaries? You'd have to have specific targets and ways to gauge that.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And there are organizations out there that work on that. Specifically, since we're talking about Bob Willard, he is one of the founders of the Future Fit Business Benchmark. That's, I think, based in the UK now. I can put the link in the chat, but they have it's Creative Commons, so they're sharing essentially all their frameworks and measures and metrics of how businesses can understand the impact they have and how they can measure. Oh, sorry, that didn't go into the chat. Let me see quickly. There we go. Now it should be there.
Great.
And so that is, I think, something that you would be referring to, that helps businesses really understand. And they have some high-profile clients. I think most notably the ones that are most outspoken about it, the Body Shop, whose goal is to become absolutely climate neutral. And so, yes, I think it's a big challenge. It's not easy to measure that, but there are some approaches that already can point companies towards where they need to go.
Great, thank you.
Can I make a comment?
Sure.
I have a question. I mean, yeah, great presentation so far, but maybe I'm missing something when, and maybe Fabienne, you can clarify that for me, is when we started the talk, there was a clear connection to the Sustainable Developmental Goals, and this seemed to be completely disappeared from the different presentations. We're moving on sustainability as a means, that's fine. But I miss the connection to the overall global agenda that we thought we were working on again as well. So where is that? Okay.
No, not at all. So the methodology, like we explained, we first start with sustainability, and we have the 3 pillars on sustainability, and on each 3 pillars of sustainability, you have the link with SDG. The way we go first with the framework, like the framework was already about the one for Bob Willard. It was about the 7 benefits on sustainability, because this is a business language that when we talk about the company, they can rely on that because it's like a language business. But when you get a step beyond, after the 3 pillars of sustainability, then you have the link with SDG. Yes, we are not going to address this now because that is the introduction, but we have some material that we are going to share on the platform, and you are going to have the map, and I can send the link, but you are going clear to have the map between the performance, the social performance social performance, economic performance, and environmental performance with the link of the SDG. So SDG could be a target, but for achieving to this way, that is what the private sector, like I explained to you, they are quite disconnect to SDG because for them it's like too far for their business. But by starting by talking about 7 benefits of sustainability, especially for SMEs, is the way first they organize their activity, the way they improve their performance, the social performance, the environmental performance, and the economic performance. By doing that, they are going to achieve also the SDG. So I'm going to share the link. So this is something is going to be also on the reading material. So you can see on the Bob Willard methodology, he put the link between sustainability and the SDG.
Okay, that's fine. I mean, that's fine. So another comment I would make is, and I already work here with some SMEs here in Belgium. And one of the challenges, and it's not been reflected yet, is the financial situation. Through COVID, a lot of SMEs in. So a lot of CEOs or business owners, they want to talk sustainability, but their first priority right now is cash flow. Okay, they're suffering from cash flow issues, and so they cannot really. They're all thinking very short term, and they can't think long term. So we definitely have to overcome that barrier too. Okay, so.
When we talk about, so that is good you put the point about that, because sustainability, you have the third pillar, that the economic pillar, that is the profit. And this is about, for example, your cash flow management. What happened with SMEs, especially many of them, they drive their business on the for looking the short-term profit on the short term. So it means when a crisis like this comes, you crash. Because it's not, you don't, it's like a example, like a personal saving, right? You save when you have money. The day you are increased, if you don't have saving, there is no way. Money can just appear. So the problem with SMEs, they drive all their decisions on the short term. So that is why we start to talk about sustainability and resilience. It's because something I didn't put in place, if I didn't put my cash flow management, and when we talk about my cash flow management, is about the way I do the review. So that is like the next, for example, on the next global meeting, we are going to have this subject, and you also I'm going to present you one of survey I'm prepared with Bob Willard for the moment. And when we talk about financial performance is about everything I mitigate my risks, how I beat my credit worthiness, because if I don't have a good liquidity or I don't pay, for example, in France, but the government say we are going to support only the bank, we are going to support people that pay their loan. So if 3 months before you didn't pay your loan on time, you can come back to the bank to say, I can't pay you because now it's the Codiv. That we say no. So that we check your credit record, and if your credit records were nice, based on that, the bank can provide you some support for the Codiv. So this is something that, of course, we can address everything on the first global meeting. That's why we split. But that that is the first one. So we are going to deep into the subject, and slowly we get to the point. So SDG, don't forget, is the level 3. So we get there, definitely.
I just have a quick question. Thank you so much, Tim, for the presentation. And I think I kind of agree with what Rudy was saying in terms of the financial aspects and the current cash flow situation for a lot of businesses. We may have all heard about the Climate Disclosure Standards Board, and I think Tim mentioned about the data discrepancies and difficulty to get standardized data, something which is equal across the board. What is the feasibility if we can, sort of encourage businesses to sort of join the CDSB, and are they too small to be part of that, or can we do something of that sort so that we have data which is more sort of consistent?
Yeah, of course, and this is the reason we are here. So at the end of November, we should come up with an action plan. And all of us, when you subscribe to this consultation, you subscribe to bring your expertise, your knowledge, and come up with this action plan. So that's why we say we are going to organize like some global meeting like this at the end of each month, but also we are going to have a webinar because we have to address many issues and to be able to come up in November with a complete action plan, whatever, probably they can apply all the solutions, but how we can inspire. So that is the main key, is inspire. We can try to do anything. That's why also Tim talk about the ABCD methodology. Is about probably to be inspired, to analyze my current situation, to prioritize some action, and to start about what I have today. And that will be like the brainstorming we start in September. And I think you have a lot of questions, and yeah, it would be great to work with all of us, and we are going to probably to have a good contribution for supporting the SM globally.
All right, thanks, Fabian.
Thank you. So we are sorry, we are quite almost right off the time, but it was so good. Probably I will leave the floor to Nicolas to make the conclusion, and then tomorrow you are going to receive the group composition. Let me know if you want to change, if you change your mind between your first choice. We are trying to manage. And on Monday, you are going to receive from Winnie the invitation for the platform. We are going to have library, so there is some material that your leader, they are going to share with you. But also, if you want to share other material or book with other, you are going to have the global library where we can also post different articles and whatever we think it could be useful for everyone. So typically you have 1 month, so you have like August during your holiday. I don't know where you're going to spend your holiday, but at least we have 1 month in August to read the different material, right? Like we talked today. So at least in September, when we are going to start, we are almost be at the same level, and we can start to dig in and the discussion. Okay.
I'll just ask you a quick question, Fabienne. It's Duncan here. Will the presentations be made available to us all?
Yeah, it's already waiting for you on the platform.
Oh, great. Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
so it just like, yeah, it just take me time Monday to send over the email. I think 60%, but all the library is already available, and also the team leader already shared their documents. Okay. We find everything available on the library.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. But after the call, we are going to receive the video and the transcription of the chat, and then we are going to move from there.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So I think we can conclude there. Thank you all very much for your contribution, for your energy. And I'm very glad to be part of this initiative. So thank you, Fabienne. Thank you all. And see you next time. And we'll keep in touch over the months of August. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
All right.